Is God trustworthy? Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Mary Beth.
Join us as we seek to answer this question through wholehearted conversation.
Discover the wit and wisdom that comes from being anchored in Christ and connected to one another.
This is Trustworthy. On this episode of Trustworthy, we are going to be listening to our very first podcast ever, also known as a pilot.
Hi there.
Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Mary Beth. I guess it would be helpful if we said each other's names in our greeting.
It's always good to make an introduction.
Yes. Hi, I'm Sarah.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth.
Hi, welcome to Trustworthy.
There you go.
A podcast where we talk about how we know that God is trustworthy. Well, we've had one brief screen test before this, just to get our feet wet, so to speak, and to see what we sound like. That was interesting.
You sounded so lovely.
Oh, as did you, my dear.
Why, thank you so much.
Yes, I think we sounded erudite, sophisticated, and exceedingly beautiful.
For those of you who don't know what we look like, because I'm sure there are millions of people listening.
Yes.
Who don't know how to Google search our pictures. Just imagine the most beautiful women you could ever picture, and that's us.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever that looks like for you, that's who it will be for you.
Think about that.
Oh, and we're so humble. Well, my favorite definition of humility is agreeing with God about who you are. Sometimes we are prideful by putting ourselves down.
Yeah.
Which seems weird.
Well, and it's a form of self-righteousness. It's like the flip side of self-righteousness.
Yes.
That if we are not finding our worth and our value and who God has made us to be and who Christ says we are putting value in what we think we should be, what we think we should look like, or fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And by doing that, it actually is putting us in this position of self-righteousness, even if we are putting ourselves down. If we are not living up to that standard that we have created in our own minds, it is not Christ's righteousness on which we are relying.
I was just thinking while you were talking about that when we don't agree with God about who we are, we set ourselves up to be a little God. And we are not trusting him for our very best.
That's right. There's a Bonhoeffer, have you ever read Bonhoeffer's book, Ethics?
I have not.
I have not read the whole thing because it's heavy, but
we'll put a link to that
great.
In our show notes.
That's right. So for those of you who don't know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer was, the short version is he was a German who ran an underground church during World War II and was part of a plot to take out Hitler and ended up being murdered himself in, I believe, in a concentration camp or some kind of prison. I'm not exactly sure on those details. Anyway, he wrote a book called Ethics. And in the first couple of pages, he says something to the effect of, in wanting to become like God, we become a God ourselves. And so when we put ourselves in our own desire for knowledge and control and power above knowing God himself, we make ourselves a little g God, that we are worshiping ourselves and serving ourselves.
Yes. Anything that we spend time thinking about, working for, diverting resources to, is an object of worship. And there are many things that we can worship, and you could use a lowercase if you want to. But when any one of those things becomes the primary object of our worship, we do not have a right relationship with God. And things get all sorts of messed up. And this is essentially the root of sin. I mean, this is how, we're tempted by our enemy when we upend God's place in our life in relation to these other things.
Well, and then that brings back this concept of trustworthy, which we have thought about for this podcast.
Yes.
So what is the trustworthy person or thing or idea that we either are clinging to or should be clinging to? For both of us, the answer, I believe, would be the same in our Savior.
Yes, yes.
But couched with that is also the reality that all truth is God's truth.
Yes.
And so
all wisdom is his wisdom.
Yes. There are trustworthy things that are not contrary or outside of him, but that, we could say, like, I trust my husband. He is a trustworthy spouse. I trust my phone to charge when I plug it into the charger.
Right. I trust that the law of gravity will be in place when I wake up tomorrow morning.
But what are those things that we are viewing as trustworthy in our lives that may not actually be so?
Yeah.
Like my own heart.
Ooh, the heart is deceitful above all else. I think that it is very true that people are not trustworthy as compared to God. In fact, we can all recall a time when our hearts were broken by another person. I have to say, though, in all the experiences that I've had, my heart has never been broken by God. Now, I've been disappointed. My heart has been broken by circumstances that have happened that he's allowed to happen in my life. I have screamed at him. Yeah. I have become angry. I have cried. But God has never broken my heart. He's never let me down. So I guess I would have to say that he's pretty darn trustworthy.
Yeah. Well, and I think the fact that we can scream and yell at him and know that it doesn't mean he's going to strike us down.
Stop loving us.
Because we're
never going to stop
protected from the wrath of God through what Christ has done for us.
Yes.
It doesn't mean we disrespect him, but it means we know he can handle our disappointment, our frustration, our anger, all of that, because he is trustworthy.
He is. He is unchanging. He's the same yesterday and today and tomorrow.
Can't say that about pretty much anything else.
No.
Anyone else.
Yeah.
I don't know who I'm going to be when I wake up tomorrow,
Yeah, exactly. What kind of mood I'm going to be in. It just depends on what things are going on in my body, in my head,
That's the truth.
in the environment around me. I was thinking about this concept about how feelings are not truth. Feelings are a weather station. They're a barometer to let us know the temperature changes in the atmosphere around us, right? Mm-hmm. They are a thermometer to let us know the temperature changes going on inside our own bodies, whether it be physical, mental, whatever, our reaction to a bad night of sleep, whatever. And I'm sure there's some other ones. I think hygrometer or something. Doesn't that measure something?
I have no idea what
I don't know.
Means.
We need all you boaters out there and weather aficionados to tell us. But I like to draw connections between things. That's one of my competencies on the Strengths Finder test is I'm a connector. So I like to make little connections. So I just thought about how our feelings are really more an indicator and not actual truth. I think that we so often get tricked, especially in today's world, into believing, putting a lot of misplaced faith, and then acting on our feelings, and then using those feelings to justify our actions. That's a real big one on social media.
Can you give us an example?
I'd love to give you an example. I can think of many. So, for example, let's say I'm feeling betrayed, hurt by someone. I'm feeling that they rejected me, that they have turned their back on me, that they have hurt me deeply. And so I go into my head alone, which is never a good thing. And I come up with all these reasons why this rejection and hurt has happened. And I decide that I am going to cut them out of my life. I'm going to cancel them. I'm going to ghost them. I'm going to unfriend them, whatever. And so I do that. But maybe this person was going through a difficult time. Maybe this person had just gotten the worst news that they'd ever gotten in their life. And that the last interaction I had with them is not a good indication of who they are as a person. But I didn't make this about them. I made it about me and my feelings because, again, I'm setting myself up as lowercase God and putting myself above everyone around me. So I go off and decide that that's the way it is. And the relationship could potentially be lost. I have isolated myself from someone else and now can go out, maybe post on my Facebook page or wherever, that I'm justified in my actions. This person acted this way and made me feel, and therefore I'm justified in my actions. And there would be a lot of people, especially in the culture today, that would agree and give kudos or that's right, you live your truth. Just do what feels good. But at the end of the day, I'm left alone. And maybe I shouldn't have relied on my feelings. Maybe I should have asked some questions or given the person the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, this actually reminds me, we have a couple of blogs from the Willowdale Women's blog that touch on some of the things you've been saying. One of them, to be self-aggrandizing, I myself wrote during the pandemic about how I misheard some song lyrics and was very stubbornly convinced that I knew what the right words were because it's how I heard it.
I love this one. Yes.
And, you know, come to find out I was wrong because I was just listening to my own thoughts, basing it on what I felt was right. I didn't want to hear anyone else's opinions on the matter because I had checked it out. I had drawn my own conclusions and
yes,
I was right, but I was not right. So it reminded me of that blog post very similarly. And I think that there have been a couple of other ones about just our, need for other people and how to kind of repair relationships when needed.
Yeah.
So there's a plug for our Willowdale Women's blog. We have, I don't even know how many writers right now. 8 or 10 maybe different women.
I think so. And that's just our current staff. Like before this, we've had at least 8 or 10 others that have written too, guest writers. Well, this actually is an excellent segue. I have a question for you, Mary Beth.
I'm all ears.
Excellent. I'm wondering if you could tell me about the last time that your heart broke for another person.
Sarah, that's a great question. And one that I do not experience very often because I am not super empathetic and sympathetic. I would say becoming a mother completely changed that in me. That I was like, oh, I do have the capacity for this. It is down there somewhere.
Yeah, becoming a parent will completely change your perception of who you are. It'll make you realize just how inadequate you actually are.
Yes. And I think that especially because my boys are so young, their hurts and their losses and their failures are obvious and easy to spot. And thankfully, so far, easy to mend and help them along, right? So I think that would be that's what first comes to mind is if one of my children tries something and doesn't succeed and gets really frustrated and starts, talking negatively about themselves and how they can't do it or whatever their language might be about themselves, and kind of stepping into that as a mom and just affirming the truths of who God made them to be, who God says they are, because you love this little child more than almost anyone else in the world. And you see their potential and they don't see it. And you see the good in them and they're only seeing the negative in the moment. So I think those are the times where your heart kind of breaks for like, you don't see the big picture. I don't want you to be stuck in this moment of failure, but to look past it. What about you? Do you want to answer that question?
I want to answer that question.
When is the last time that your heart broke for another person?
Whew. Well, there's degrees.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I got news of a young woman, college age, who was struggling with anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts. And I was a college student of an age that struggled with anxiety and depression. I certainly have some empathy. And I have had a prayer. It's a dangerous prayer. I'm just going to tell you. Since 2016, I think, that God would break my heart for the things that break his. And I have to tell you that it has taken me into some places, conversations with people that were heavy. But I believe that it's helped me understand more the heart of God. And I believe that it has helped me be just a better friend, a better listener, which I'm not very good at by nature, so I have to practice. I've had people to say to me, specifically women, because that's where I feel I'm called, that they feel better to know that they're not alone, that I've just helped to ease their burden. That to say that when I just recently heard this news, I just spent some time in anguished prayer for this young woman. Yeah, that's my answer. That's the last time that my heart was broken for someone else.
Well, and this is why, as I was mentioning earlier, it's so good for us as humans, honestly, but especially as Christians, to have other people in our lives that are speaking into certain issues that everyone is experiencing, right? It's my natural makeup is not to be highly empathetic and sympathetic. I need people like Sarah in my life who are bent toward that to help point me back to, hey, Mary Beth, maybe you should be thinking about these things. You know, like how could you be a little more empathetic and sympathetic to the people in your life and the world around you? I don't know what that would mean for you on the contrast, perhaps, and correct me if I'm speculating. Perhaps it's sometimes you need to process some of that and pull back from some of it to make sure you're not getting bogged down and taking on the feelings of everyone else. It's good to be there and be supportive, but you can also kind of go too far the other way, whereas I'm too far away from it. You might be too far into it sometimes. Does that make sense?
Yes. As a recovering codependent.
There you go.
Okay. Which I'm not ashamed to admit, because I think it's the most under talked about, give me the right word. How would you edit what I just said? It's a topic that's,
not talked about enough.
Yes, there we go. Not talked about enough. Yes. Yeah. And I think depending on different situations and times in our lives, you know, there's ebb and flow in relationships, and especially marriage and children and parent relationships. There's times when we need to be more present and more invested and involved, but not at the expense of losing ourselves. You know? Yes. And I admire your matter-of-factness. I admire your ability to state what the situation is and present a solution and just move through it. As I mentioned earlier, feelings sometimes were my guiding MO. Like that was it. Oh, my feelings. Yes, I should do this because I feel this way.
All right. You want a more lighthearted question?
Yes. One lighthearted question.
All right. In the contrast of what you just asked me, what is something in the recent past that has made you laugh so hard you cried?
Oh my goodness. Something that made me laugh so hard I cried. Okay. And I don't know if I cried, but this was hilarious. And the three of us were laughing. So the other morning, my husband and son came back from having breakfast together. And my son ran up with this huge stack of books. And he's like, Mom, Dad showed me something. You got to hear this. you got to read the first line of the book and then you add this phrase after it. I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, Mom, listen. So he got this book out, and I'm just going to take a book off of my shelf because this is absolutely hilarious, Mary Beth. Okay. All right. This is David Baldacci. Wish you well. Excellent book, by the way. Okay. Here we go. First line of the book. The air was moist, the coming rain telegraphed by plump gray clouds and the blue sky fast fading. Then the dragons came.
So then the dragons came is the addition.
Then the dragons came is the addition to any.
I can think of a lot of good policy and politics books.
Yes.
That would be a hilarious addition.
It would be a hilarious addition. I think, listen, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And then the dragons came. So we had a lot of fun with that.
In the beginning, God
created the heavens and earth. And then the dragons came. Yes.
It's not too far off, right?
No, it certainly isn't. Yeah. Leviathan, Behemoth. Okay, how about you?
Yeah, so this is the tricky part of asking these questions is I didn't think to prepare my own answer. I would say, well, there's one that I don't want to share because I live with boys and there's just boy humor in our house, as you probably
are you kidding me? Yes, that's okay.
Probably not great to share on a podcast. So I'll think of a different one. Oh, okay. This is a cultural snapshot of my generation. I don't know if you ever watched the show Gossip Girl.
No.
Okay. It was a CW show in the, I guess, early 2000s or the aughts, as they call them, like 2010s. And it's like Blake Lively and all these other.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
And I mean, there's not a whole lot great about the show other than its entertainment value. But the whole premise of the show is that it's these Upper East Side kids in New York, private high school. And then there's this unknown figure called Gossip Girl who runs this kind of rumor mill secret thing. And they don't know who Gossip Girl is. And she sends out, this is, keep in mind, the technology of the early 2000s. She would send out alerts on people's like Blackberries. Say, yes. Gossip Girl here. And she would always have these clever quips of whatever was going on of, you know, so-and-so was seen with so-and-so. Okay. So that was a long intro too. We have neighbors who are also around our age, and we have a group chat, the husband and wife and myself and my husband, and we will send each other updates in the form of Gossip Girl. Our banter in the Gossip Girl style was very entertaining to me. And I laughed at all four of us. And it was one of those where it was, I'm so pleased with how funny we are. You know, it was like very
exactly.
Like, I love our inside joke. I'm so hilarious.
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes if other people are laughing too, then it probably was funny.
Yeah.
Okay. Your challenge for this week is to pick a book off your shelf, read the first line and add, and then the dragons came.
Yeah. How did we get here? Should we start there?
Yeah. How did we get here?
How did you come to want to do a podcast?
I like to talk. And just to be straightforward, that's it. I like to hear myself talk. When this really started was back during 2020. I started to bring this all up again, right? Yeah. Like a bad penny. I had spent a lot of time alone with my family, but alone. And I just had this sense that there were people out there that were hurting and lonely and missing things, whether it be toilet paper or hanging out with their friends or trips to the movie theater. Everybody was very disconnected. And I just kind of had this placed on my heart that like, gosh, there are people out there that are lonely. And I don't like that. I want to be everybody's friend, which is a good and a bad thing.
Yeah.
So I actually started with, there was a recording I did, this idea I had about just calmly encouraging and reassuring someone at the end of a day, just to let them know that they did their best. It was all going to be okay. And just a way to sort of calm their heart and mind before sleep. So that was sort of my first idea. And then I've had a lot of ideas since then, but mostly I wanted to make something that is conversation between friends and with other people about things that can make life better for everybody.
I like it. Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing me into it.
Well, yeah. I also think that doing this podcast with someone will keep me accountable.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like anytime you kind of delve into a topic that you care about, other people's voices and weighing in are always going to show you things you didn't think of, or things that can help move the ball further down the field. I think that to your point about the pandemic, it's like, if anything, it reaffirmed our need for each other, right? So I'm with you.
Yeah. We're created for community.
Yeah.
God is 3 in 1.
Mm-hmm.
And each part of the Trinity speaks to the others about who they are.
Yeah.
And so just you and I sitting here on this couch right now are speaking to each other about who we truly are.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing.
It is.
Yeah.
But when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. Because you are his sons, God sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but God's child. And since you are his child, God has made you also an heir. Galatians 4, verses 4 through 7. Thank you for listening to this episode of Trustworthy. Come back next week when Mary Beth and I talk about trusting God with our work. This is Trustworthy.
Hey y'all, Mary Beth here. Sarah and I are so glad that you chose to listen to our podcast. And while we think that we're awesome friends to have, we just wanted to clarify that we are not mental health professionals and want you to know that this podcast should not take the place of any paid professional advice.